The category is What the Trans Darling.
Hello. We haven't done a podcast in such a long time. And me and Ashley are going into why on our proper next full episode next week. But yesterday, at time of recording, I spent the day hanging around outside the LGB Alliance's first conference and mostly hanging around the counter-protest from the trans community. And there's a lot to go through. So consider this my report on what the hell all that was. Now, there is a bit of a run-up that is going to sound pretty bad, but I promise, stick it out, because this is a story of hate being stood up to that genuinely gives me a ton of hope and a surprising amount of laughs. So let's just cut the crap and get into it. The LGB Alliance, for the few of you who do not know, are an anti-trans quote-unquote pressure group who believe that trans people are inherently homophobic because if some trans man says they are a man, that means that a cis gay guy's sexuality is redefined. You'll notice I did not say gay and bisexual men, because it's safe to say that the LGB Alliance is pretty goddamn biphobic as well as transphobic. You may also have noticed that this logic is strikingly similar to homophobes, who claim that same-sex marriages somehow redefined their own marriages. You would think that people with fully functioning logic centres would be like, how does someone else doing something totally unrelated to myself redefine key elements of my life and existence on this planet? But when it comes to self-absorption, collective narcissism, and supremacist thinking, the bigot operates without limits in those areas. They totally come out with the most bizarre stuff, the LGB Alliance. Like, they've claimed that trans-related healthcare sterilises people, which just isn't true. Like, this week a story broke about trans man friend of the podcast, Freddie McConnell, who is pregnant with his second child, which is the opposite of being sterile. Trans people can conceive, can carry pregnancies. Anyone in the community will know someone who has brought a child into the world with their own baby-making equipment. But this is the level of misinformation the LGBT Alliance spread on a regular basis. As a quick aside, Freddie McConnell is doing a crowdfunder as to be recognised as his child's father. He has to temporarily relocate to Sweden because the UK Gender Recognition Act is a nightmare for trans parents. We're going to do an episode about that in the coming months, but there's a link in the description. If you're a bit flush with cash, why don't you go help Freddie out? You could do with the cash. So, the LGBT Alliance have been the most successful anti-trans hate group in the United Kingdom on a number of metrics. They have regular contact with the current Conservative government. They are regularly uncritically platformed, incorrectly, as voices of the UK's LGBT population, and have been granted charity status by the UK's Charity Commission, which is fucking great. Whereas Stonewall, the UK's biggest establishment for LGBTQI plus rights, is actively vilified for doing all the things any lobby, group and charity does, whilst the LGBT Alliance, whose charitable practices are basically non-existent, are platformed on the regular to spread misinformation about you, about us, and about the wider LGBT plus community, because they suck. The example I keep referring to when people ask me for evidence of the LGBT Alliance's misinformation and lies is a report that came out in the Telegraph on Christmas Day in 2020, where the founders of the Alliance claimed that transgenderism, their words, not mine, was causing some kind of extinction event amongst lesbians, despite the fact that the Office of National Statistics have released data showing that since 2014, the number of people identifying as gay, lesbian or bisexual has increased every single year except one. Did I tell you these people are lie-peddling bigots? I might have overread that point. But without the assistance of the UK press, who have something to gain from bigging up these clowns for the clicks, or the fact that government ministers and representatives let these liars into the room to discuss policy, this group would not be getting anywhere. And the reason for that is that their numbers are relatively low. I know this because I got up at the crack of dawn and made my way to the conference venue to count how many people turned up as best I could. The LGB Alliance announced on Twitter that they expected 500 plus attendees, which are considering, according to the Office of National Statistics again, at least 1.4 million people in the UK identify as lesbian, gay or bisexual. 500 plus would be a ridiculously low number. But based on what I saw, 500 plus people did not attend the LGB Alliance conference. In reality, they probably got around half that. Between 8 and 10:30am, I counted 332 people entering the Queen Elizabeth II Centre. Not all of these people would be attending the LGB Alliance conference, as there was at least one more event being held at that venue, and I am pretty sure I counted vendors and others who were working the LGB Alliance conference. But at my most generous, assuming that pretty much all of the people that I saw into the building were there for the LGB Alliance conference and not there working there, I'd say that maybe over half of the number the LGB Alliance claimed actually showed up. And to give you some context, just down the road in Soho, at any LGBT venue, that's probably going to have more patrons in it than this conference did. I have heard of Games Workshop's meets that have bigger attendances than this thing. Like, Warhammer is bigger than the LGB Alliance. But it is a testament to how much help and access to our government and the UK's media outlets that these clans get, that they have been successful in artificially inflating their numbers, their legitimacy, and their own importance. I did not want to talk about the specifics of who showed up. I have no interest in anything to do with that. I had no interest in taking pictures or revealing who supports the LGB Alliance because I just don't care. But all the usual crew were in attendance, you know, Graham Linehan, Rosie Duffield, Mayor Forstatter, Baroness Nicholson, who actually waved at me and made me feel a little bit sick. You name them, they were probably there. You will notice that all of those examples are straight people. Yeah, there's a lot of straight people at this LGB conference event. But an attendee who got my attention a lot was another straight person, the Post-Millennials editor-at-large Andy Ngo, a far-right reporter who demonises Antifa, has conspired with essentially neo-Nazis to attack and dox left-wing activists in the States, and has associated with groups such as the US-based Proud Boys, who describe themselves as Western chauvinists, as well as Patriot Prayer, a literal violent neo-Nazi hate group, who regularly spout white supremacist rhetoric concerning Muslims, black people, Black Lives Matter, and you get the idea. This guy's not good. Now, Ngo was granted a press pass by the LGB Alliance. That happened because why not? Now, a lot of people believe that the LGB Alliance are fascist, far-right. I don't entirely agree with that assessment because that would suggest that the LGB Alliance have any other thought in their heads that isn't about trans people. They're not nationalists. I just don't think that they are a far-right group in the classical sense. But there is a saying that if a person will sit down for dinner with 11 Nazis, then you've got 12 Nazis having dinner together. At the very least, actual fascism isn't a deal breaker for the LGB Alliance, and they will utilise any so-called journalist without any principles getting in the way. I would argue him being granted a press pass is the most indicative of just what the LGB Alliance are about, and yet his attendance has not caused a stir I would expect or want to see. I should mention that around when the LGB Alliance announced their conference, I actually inquired about getting a press pass. I received no response. To be honest, I don't blame them, because whilst I will argue base my views on observable fact, I have an agenda, I have a bias. Because every journalist does. Any journalist who says they don't is a liar. Even the BBC, like every journalist has a bias. And I think the LGB Alliance, if they know or care about who I am, probably were right to be like, well, maybe we shouldn't have her at this place because she clearly hates us, because we are hateable. And you know what, I think I can live with the fact that my agenda does not align with the LGB Alliance, and find it profoundly disturbing that Andy Ngo's fascist agenda clearly does. The coverage in the media of the conference has been predictably questionable. Much of it was linked to the recent controversy surrounding Sussex University philosophy academic Kathleen Stock, who is not only vehemently anti-trans and vehemently an anti-trans activist, but also happens to be a patron of the LGB Alliance. So that was the link that they used to try and tie her into this business. But the general tone in outlets that aren't LGBT related, such as Pink News Attitude and the like, is that the LGB Alliance represent a significant portion of the LGBT community, which anyone walking around Soho anytime, or anyone who has spent any time in LGBT spaces can tell you is categorically not true. Now, the LGB Alliance alleges that they are, despite all of that, a safe space for trans people. They claim to have trans members, but apart from rolling out anti-trans, trans woman for hire Debbie Hayton every time she belches up a specky article, there is no evidence that this is true. A transgender woman actually did attend the conference and claims to have been verbally abused by at least one of the attendees. Jen Ives is a comedian who admittedly attended the conference as a joke, and I spoke to her outside the conference. Thanks for talking to me. So you bought a ticket to attend the conference today, is that right?
I did. I spent 85 big ones, dollaroonies on this, just for the pleasure of spending time with them.
How was it? How has it been since you got here?
At the start, it was very, very civil. In all honesty, I got in a few conversations with people, and they were very, very polite to me and cordial. And I watched the first session, what do you call it? Like talk, yeah. But this is all under the preface that I didn't tell them that I was trans. I got into a conversation with a young man, and I told him that I was trans, and he ran off Kind of. I don't want to be libelous. I don't know if he ran. He went away. And then I walked over towards my friend here, David, and he happened to be standing near the toilets, not anywhere visually near the toilets, but the direction of the toilets. And as soon as I went over to him, that said gentleman ran back with his phone out, in my face, called me a fucking nonce, said a lot of things actually that I can't really remember, but the gist of it was, you're a fucking nonce. And then basically more LGB Alliance people kind of gathered around me, about 3 or 4. Some were trying to diffuse the situation, but in a very lazy way. They were kind of just saying, well, basically, people came in and you could tell that they had assumed that I had done something. I was definitely they were like, what have you done kind of thing, because he was very upset, and he was very, very upset actually. And the security appeared, but they didn't do anything. They just watched. And then he went away and to calm down, and then various people tried to do damage control with me, and a lot of people told me that I was a provocateur, although I would say that I've done nothing today except be very civil and nice to everybody. So I even bought a t-shirt. So anyway, a lot of celebrities in there. Graham Linehan, said hello to him, shook his hand. Dreyfus was there, of Gimme 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 fame.
James Dreyfus.
That's the guy.
Former master, current nothing.
Hey, he's got a big following in there. And yeah, that was it really. That's what happened. I am currently waiting to talk to security because I think they kind of did a shit job. I'm just going to lodge a complaint with them. That's kind of where I'm at the moment.
The LGB Alliance came out, I think it was yesterday, saying that they are accepting of trans people. Would you say that that is the case based on what you have experienced today?
No, because to my knowledge, I think, and I don't want to make any assumptions, but it seemed very much like I was the only trans person in the building. There might be others, I don't know, but I didn't see them. And everything seemed fine before they knew I was trans, and then when they did know I was trans, I suddenly became an activist and provocateur in their eyes. And I'm sure they're glad that I've left now. I've been there a few hours. I would say no. I don't think they're happy with me being there. I think they think that, well, someone called me a nonce, and then someone came over to clarify that actually what he meant was I was a political nonce, which apparently means that I opened the door to noncery.
Okay, I've never heard that before as a rationale, but
Yeah.
sure, why not? Why not?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It'll catch on. But yeah, it was, before that, it was kind of a nice, well, I don't want to say nice, but it was at least civil. I guess because they thought they were in their own element, but yeah, they definitely didn't like having me at the party, I think. Well, I didn't feel welcome after they knew, that's for sure.
I guess.
I was going to say I really wanted to ask Graham Linehan a question. That was the plan, wasn't it? I was going to ask him something, but I don't think they would let me have the microphone now, unfortunately.
What were you going to ask him?
I was going to ask him if he was going to be attending the disco later and if he would like to have a dance with me.
I think a lot of people listening are going to be wondering why a trans person would choose to attend an event like this. Were you here looking for material as a comedian, or were you here just out of curiosity, or?
Not at all. I just love Graham Linehan. He's one of my favourite writers. My favourite sitcom is Mrs. Brown's Boys, which I love. And I wanted to tell him. So no, I just came. Here's the thing, right? So it's called the LGB Alliance. I am bisexual. So I thought, I'm welcome, right? Apparently not. They're not as essentialist as they claim.
Fair enough. Jen, thanks for talking to me. I'm sorry you had a bad time at the LGB Alliance conference.
I had a fucking great time. You did? Couldn't have asked for a better result, really, could I? No, yeah, it was interesting. It was an education. I've learned. I feel like I've learned a lot more about the organisation, and I probably won't be joining anytime soon. So there we go. You can't say that I haven't done my due diligence and gone to speak directly to them, because I have, and they weren't very interested in what I had to say.
Fair enough. Jen, thanks so much for talking to me.
You're welcome.
Have, have a better rest of your day.
You're welcome.
Now, hearing this astonished me because I actually thought the LGBT Alliance, who attempt to be seen as respectable at every opportunity, including claiming to be a safe space for trans people, would not let something like this happen. You would think that they would bend over backwards to make sure that the claims at least appear to sound credible. I saw out a statement from the venue about the incident, but they have not got back to me, and I don't think they ever will. I could approach the LGB Alliance for comment, but honestly, what would be the fucking point? If they got back to me at all, it would just be nonsense, and they can get their crap in the mainstream media anytime they like, so I'm not really that keen on interacting with them. But the main story here is the protest against the conference and the LGB Alliance. I was outside for most of the day and saw the response grow from a small group of 2 to 150 trans people and allies, which possibly even equal the number of people attending the conference. Occasionally, attendees did try to bait the protesters. One guy yelled across that he wasn't cis, he was just a man, to which I couldn't stop yelling back myself, "Nobody cares, go back to your conference." And one woman came over and wanted to take a photo of me whilst I was holding a sign for some protesters who popped off for lunch. I wasn't protesting, but, somebody had to stand there with a sign. And when I said no, she started saying, "What, are you ashamed of your sign?" and being all in my face about it. And several people told me about an incident later when 2 men kissed each other in front of the protest in a genuine attempt to provoke a response, which is just so absurd. By the sounds of it, they genuinely seem to think that the trans community would be provoked by the sight of 2 men kissing, when as many as half of us identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual. These people have no clue as to what we actually are. But the protesters were very restrained, no arrests, no violence. The protest itself went incredibly smoothly. It was loud, it made the point, but thankfully the police kept their relative distance, and any attempts to bait the protesters from conference attendees was met with laughs and derision instead of rage and fuckery, which was great. Andy Ngo claimed on his Twitter account that there was an intense increase in security due to extremism of radical trans activism, but I talked to several members of the security team and 3 police officers who told me that the level of security and police presence was not unusual, especially considering how close the venue is to Parliament, and especially considering the violent murder of Conservative MP David Amess had just happened. At the start of the day, there was a large police presence. As many as 30 uniformed police officers were present in vans, and this was ringing alarm bells to me, as I have been to party political conferences that have less uniformed officers on the ground than at this venue. But as the day went on, the number of uniformed officers decreased to around 3 or 4, and only seemed to increase during shift changes for a short time. There was no point, to my knowledge, where police intended to intervene in any significant way, and I made sure to keep in touch with police officers on the scene to make sure. At various points, the protesters, understandably, were very concerned about the police situation, as there is a history of police officers being heavy-handed with trans protesters going back to the days of Action for Trans Health. But from what I was told from police on the ground, they were more interested in the protest ending so they could go home, and weren't interested in doing all the paperwork and fucking around that would have resulted from getting involved. This is not a defence of the police, as they have proven time and again that they can be, and often are, just as much of a threat to trans people as anything else, but this time they kept their distance and the protesters kept their distance from them, and I just haven't got anything else to report when it comes to the police. That's it, that's all I saw. But what are the protesters themselves? I spoke to a great many of them throughout the day. There were cis allies present, there were trans people from all walks of life, but the vast majority were young, politically engaged, and honestly, I left there feeling so much optimism for Generation Y people. To use a bullshit nothing term, that just means people younger than me who cannot remember 9/11. But when it comes to organisations, representation from the larger organisations was thin on the ground. The only major group I saw in any official capacity was Pride in Surrey, whose members arrived right at the start of the day to protest Surrey's Police and Crime Commissioner Lisa Townsend, who was featured at the conference as a speaker. Townsend has railed against trans equality and indirectly have advocated for people to break the Equality Act for a while now, and also for them to deny trans inclusion in certain public spaces, which, as a Police and Crime Commissioner, is an astonishing stand to make, being against the law. Here is my chat with Kel Cook, Pride in Surrey's communication lead.
Thank you for taking the time to talk to me. So, why have you decided to come here and hold up your wonderfully pretty signs at this wonderful, wonderful conference centre?
The reasons are twofold, really. Firstly, we think that the LGB Alliance is a hate group and we cannot abide their trans exclusionary agenda. Secondly, the Police and Crime Commissioner for Surrey, Lisa Townsend, is giving a speech here today, and we have made it our mission to call out Lisa Townsend whenever she is displaying these views.
When it comes to Lisa Townsend, how concerned are you about the rhetoric she's been coming out with lately?
I'm hugely concerned. You know, she's an elected official. She represents the people of Surrey, but she doesn't represent me. She doesn't represent my opinions, my views, and those of my friends and those of my organisation. And I think she's misusing the platform that she's been given to spread hate rhetoric, and I just simply won't tolerate it.
So you're mostly here to send a message to Lisa Townsend today, but also the wider LGB Alliance in general, right?
Yeah, as I said, the reasons are twofold. We can't abide the message that the LGB Alliance is sending out to people. They are a hate group, they are exclusionary. We're doing everything we can at Pride in Surrey to work with the Charities Commission to have their charitable status removed. We don't believe they should have charitable status. The misinformation that's coming out of this conference hall today, we've already had a Tory MP come out and tell us that children are being sterilised when they identify as trans, and this is just simply not true. This is misinformation, and people are hearing this and believing this, and we can't allow an organisation that's got the profile of the LGB Alliance to be spreading this kind of information, because people are misinformed and basing their opinions on misinformation.
Currently, it's a couple of hours before the main protest starts, but so far our small little group here are the only people here. Why do you think that is? If you had to speculate, I know you can't read people's minds or speak for anybody else, but if you had to guess.
Pure speculation, I would say that people are waiting for the larger protests to arrive. But my opinion is, if there's 1, 2, 3, 5 of us here, we're still, people are still seeing our signs. They're hearing our voices. People are actually coming to speak to us. That both out of the conference, the press have been to speak to us, and if we can get to speak to one person, then we've made a difference. Then we've made our voices heard. And being part of an LGBTQI group is half of it is about visibility and about making our voices heard, and that's exactly what we're doing here today, representing Pride in Surrey.
Your Pride in Surrey is a member of the Pride Organisers Network, is that right?
Yeah, we're members of UK PON, yeah.
When it comes to talking to other people who operate Prides across the country, would you say that the vast majority are on the fence about the LGB Alliance, against the LGB Alliance, pro the LGB Alliance? Like, what's the impression?
No, overwhelmingly, most Pride organisations are against the LGB Alliance. They do not represent us. We are entirely different groups. Pride organisations are here to represent our whole community, and we're Pride with the T. We're not going to pull the ladder up behind us and exclude trans people because gay people have already gained rights. It's about fighting for our whole community, and it's about our allies fighting for our community, and it's about equality.
Thank you so much for talking to me today, and thanks for standing here all these hours holding up those very, very beautiful signs. Thank you.
It was my pleasure, thank you.
So for the first half of the day, it was just myself and the Pride in Surrey folks outside the conference, with a few people coming and going at various points, but that all changed in the afternoon when the main protest kicked off. Now, the event was organised by the Transgender Action Bloc, a new group who describe themselves as radical activists dedicated to trans liberation. They are speaking my language. Here is my chat with the organisers.
Casty and Snowy, thank you very much for talking to me today. You are from the Transgender Action Bloc.
We are
and
indeed.
Why did you put this protest together?
As a show of solidarity. There's a lot of reasons to protest the LGB Alliance, but what we want to achieve by a protest is mainly just to get the trans community out on the streets to protest, to actually get involved in some form of direct action. Well, this isn't really direct action, but in some sort of protest. And secondly, we're just out here being peaceful. They fenced us off because they think we're that much of a danger. We're really not. We're just a bunch of trans people just out here existing, living our best lives, and they just thought it would be a good idea to just fence us off. And we just want to show how fucking absurd this situation is, their stances are.
So have you had any kind of response from the LGB Alliance directly, or have they just left you alone?
Not directly, but we've had a slew of people in the Twitter replies and retweets being pretty abusive, I would say.
Absolutely unhinged.
Unhinged, possibly.
Yeah, and also sort of comments they're making about us inside there are also not particularly nice. They made some comments as well, and also people in their Twitter mentions have also made comments about how we're starting at free because, quote unquote, we're on the dole. And given the ticket prices for this event, that sort of tells you the sort of audience they're really going for. A bunch of fucking Tories.
For context, the tickets are £85, and it's a work day, so only people who can afford to take the day off work to come and pay £85 for their little exclusive club of being transphobic. To me, it just seems like
There's a much better way to spend the money, like a day ticket at any rock festival would be much better use of the money.
You can go to Desert Fest,
Go to Go Ape, go climb a tree, you know?
give it to the community, like actually help people in need. But they wouldn't do that because, like, as I just said, very much against people, quote unquote, on the fucking dole. Like, they are classist, ableist, racist. They are connected to neo-Nazi groups, they're connected to anti-abortion, anti-feminist groups. We've
Big on
put this in our
denialism.
statement as well that we've put out. They are generally very much far right aligned, and I think that not enough is being done for groups to distance themselves from what are essentially a neo-Nazi mouthpiece.
It's disgraceful that there's so many MPs or like people in positions of power and authority in there. A lot of it is the PCC for Surrey. She is in there, and
Lisa Townsend.
Lisa Townsend. There's Pride in Surrey people here who are like campaigning to make that known about her and try and get her like some kind of comeuppance for being such a piece of sheep.
Andy Neo's in there, so is Graham Linehan. They're just taking any kind of populist far-right mouthpiece that they can really get. It's
Yeah,
not
they'll
the sort-
take Andy Ingo, but they won't let me in there.
No.
I applied for a press pass. Of course, they didn't get back to me, but they give Andy one.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So much free speech. So
No.
much not being fash.
Yeah.
I probably shouldn't put that in. But yeah,
No,
You
do
can
it.
if you want,
Honestly,
yeah.
it's true. They are fascist aligned. Not all of them will be directly fascist because some of them will just be like.
But they share platforms with far-right
share
people all the time.
Yeah.
They share street space with them. I mean, if you go to Speaker's Corner on any sort of Saturday, you will see TERFs engaging with far-right people. I mean, if you look on, what's his fucking name, Tommy Robinson's like pages, he frequently tweets TERF shit. I mean, the LGB Alliance is about as LGB as it is far-right, really. Well, probably.
No, yeah, the LGB Alliance has a lot of people in it who are not LGBT like, at all, straight up.
They are very far-right.
They're just,
The metaphor is a little mixed.
yeah, it's ridiculous.
so when it comes to the protest itself, are you happy with the turnout? Have you been talking to some people? What's the general mood for you
It's a
got?
work day.
Picking up, yeah, it's picking
It's-
up more than it was, and it'll pick up more later.
It's-
I'm glad there's people here.
I reckon there's about 50 odd people. I haven't counted as yet, but I am going to try and
It's
count.
like 7,500.
Yeah, we're
good at
expecting to
counting.
pick up more, after work because people have lives to do. We can't all be like Tories just making money off crypto or whatever.
Well, unscientifically, I did a count. I got here about 8 o'clock this morning, and unscientifically, I did a count of the people entering the building, and I got about 330 odd. So if you get 100 people here, you've already probably reached, yeah.
Yeah, I think we've had quite a lot of interactions. I'm not sure if everyone can make it, but we've had quite a lot of support online.
We're not going to front and act like, we know a turnout will pick up and it will probably peak sometime around 5 and 6, and we might get 200, 250 people. But we're not going to act like there's so many people out in support of us. There aren't so many people out in support of us, and that's the problem. Where we go to protests, we attend everything we can attend. We're out here fighting for our rights. We're getting hit by police very often, and this is something that we're going to keep on doing. And unless trans people out there take an active role in their emancipation, in fighting for our rights, and our LGB allies similarly pick up on the slack, then, well, there's going to be less and less of us out there on the street, and there's going to be more of us getting arrested, getting locked up, getting our rights taken away. I mean, the only way to prevent the worst from happening is to actually, for you to be there. If not you, then who? And it's not enough for trans people to be out here. We need our allies to be out here. We need straight people to be out here. We need everyone who can be out to be here, to be out here. Because it's not just a trans rights issue. This is an LGB issue as well. If they can tear us away from the LGB, I mean, they've already started attacking the LGB. It just puts everyone else in striking distance. And when they're done with the LGBT groups, like, who else are they going to come for? They're already, funded by anti-abortion groups. Half of your gender essentialists are already fucking racists. They're already putting classist shit out there, more austerity. I mean, this is an everyone issue. Every issue is completely interconnected and intersectional. Oh, there we go.
I think that's a
Transparency,
good.
human rights, Black Lives Matter, Tories.
I think that's a good place to leave it. Thank you very much for talking to me.
So there is a link in the description to all of their stuff, so you can follow them and maybe attend future protest actions that they are putting together. Their passion and how they went about this genuinely impressed me, I must admit. I was nervous covering this protest as it had the makings of a powder keg, but, I mean, the LGB Alliance are vile and are very good at pushing buttons, and trans people in general have been under so much pressure for so long, and with the police presence on top as limited as it was easy to think that this whole event could have erupted into something unpleasant, but on the contrary, the protest itself was so positive and so much more fun than I was expecting. It felt good to be a part of a large group standing up against the Alliance, and genuinely some of the chants made me laugh. You aren't cancelled if you're in the Daily Mail was one. You don't know how to dress was a particular favourite of mine that I heard earlier in the day. Honestly, I spent much of the day joking around at just how ridiculous the Alliance were, because they really were. The fashion choices of attendees were thoroughly absurd. They were mostly adorned in fashy suits, and I'm about 80% sure that one white woman had cornrows that she had attached a suffragette sash to. Yeah, that's... I mean, I am not black, but I think it's safe to say that that is not what you would call culturally sensitive. Also, when the conference disco started, the vibes I got looking in from the outside was very late 90s school disco and grab a can of Heineken from a bucket of cold water that long since stopped being ice. And whilst on-the-ground presence from the wider LGBT community felt a little lacking in my opinion, the response from larger institutions has been encouraging. Attitude magazine, one of the UK's biggest LGBT outlets, has stood firm. Pink News, Dazed, Galdem, Stonewall, the LGBT Foundation, pretty much every LGBT venue and space in the UK. Every single pride in the UK is behind us, and that has been unwavering. There is a gulf between what I call the professional activism world and the activism of regular everyday trans people they tend to get involved with. The two groups have very different ways of dealing with things, because professional activists are more likely to wander the Zoom calls of power, whilst those of us, most people listening to me right now, will have no obvious avenues to responding to hate, other than public protest of transphobic shitshows like the LGB Alliance conference. But much like Stonewall's CEO Nancy Kelly told me and Ashley when she came on this podcast, we all have our part to play, and this protest gave me hope. We played our part, and it gave me a lot of laughs that I wasn't expecting. So if you have been looking on the rise of the LGB Alliance with understandable despair, here are the key points. Their numbers are tiny, I know, because I was there counting them like a weirdo. They live in a total fantasy world, and those who live in total fantasy worlds don't tend to last, as reality is harder to fight against in the long term. They are, from what I saw, terrible at dressing themselves. One protester described them as per una engulfed, and that is accurate. But most importantly, we fucking outnumber them, and will outlast them. Right now, those in positions of power are gaining something from this backlash, but at some point, you know, the second that it stops being useful to them, they're going to dump these clowns within 30 seconds. Anyway, that's it for this pod. Come back next week when we get the band back together properly. Thanks for listening, and sorry we've been away so long. It's great to be back. Thanks, bye. This episode of What the Trans was put together by me, and just me this time, but I'd like to really thank our patrons for supporting us. So thank you Stella, Michaela Irish, Cindy Gosa, Rebecca Prentice, Charlotte Thorley, Victoria Jack, Graham Mulholland, Crazy Richard, Dan Oblivion, Georgina Young, Ty Griffiths, Florence Stanley, Riley, Helen, Mallory Moore, Chrissy Jarvis, Stuart Gray, No Gay Wait, Nick Ross, Alex Chalkley, Sim, Melody Nix, Zoe Laura Mayer, Fiona Punchard, John, Lynn McKay, Nick Duffy, CB Bailey, Gordon Cameron, Peter Kimball, Rachel T.S., Wen Witherup, Vic Parsons, Tila Wild, Atom James, Vanessa Billington, Rowan Littlejohns, Desiree Markland, Patreon user, Derek Victor, Sarah Bedful of Dogs Halliwell, Emma Doyle, Owen Willis, Catherine, Mina, Elliot McVeigh, Cassius Adair, Tuck, Melissa Brooks, Ian Cumber, Maddie Bell, Karakan12, April Heller, Sophie Lewis, Alexandra Lilly, Claire Scott, Ariadne Pena, Lauren O'Nions, Mara Reynolds, Bernard's Pink Jelly Bean, Lanos, and Chris Hubley. Thank you so much for listening. Bye bye.